Cool. So you've already noticed I posted this as Ranjan. I couldn't get into my account, my password change. So don't be too confused about that. So yeah, so Bootstrap arrived, and what Bootstrap is, you can think of as a helper library of CSS classes that you can use to expedite building your website. For example, with simple tags, you're able to move images to the different locations that you need on the screen. With templated code, you can build nav bars very quickly. You can build jumbotrons really quickly. The whole point of Bootstrap is to get you from a sketch of your website to an implementation of your website very quickly. The pains that you saw with homework one, trying to get certain buttons or information from to the right side, moving images to the center, all of that you have to write yourself, and you no longer have to do that with Bootstrap. You can expedite that process by throwing in class names and using CSS that they have already provided you. So what you probably would have seen is that to get Bootstrap, obviously you need a reference to Bootstrap. And the simplest way to do that is by using the link HTML tag. That is a style sheet. And then the link to Bootstrap would be the CDN route, which pretty much downloads that CSS to your computer every time you refresh the page. And then some examples of predefined classes would be like the Jumbotron that we saw earlier, text center for moving text to the center of the page. You can define whether a link is a button, whether it's a red button, and whether it's a large button. You don't have to memorize this stuff. You can Google all this. Bootstrap has a great website where you can walk through their documentation and see what class names are available to you.
So for the button, does that actually make the button red?
Yes, I can give you an example right now. Sure. Did you say you tried that already? That's not what happened?
I tried, but so I just kind of.
I can pull that up real quick. Let's see. All right, fancy button. If we look at the CSS, so you'll see button primary would be this blue one, and then button danger would be this red one. And we can just change this to be red, and this would be blue. We save the page, refresh. You'll notice that's the button. Now, Bootstrap also has many other buttons. Let's go there to the main website. Bootstrap button. You have many, many class definitions, and then you'll see that primary would be blue, secondary would be gray, success green, so on and so forth. To pretty much get the different colors that you need. You don't even have to use their button colors. You could write your own custom CSS and change the button to whatever color you wanted. But that's the general gist. Bootstrap allows you the ability to not have to write the color CSS for this. They're giving you predefined styles that you can now implement in your website. So I guess some of the pitfalls for Bootstrap is that once you've seen one Bootstrap website, you've pretty much seen them all. When you go to an online website and you see one of these blue or green buttons, you're like, okay, they're using Bootstrap. It's easy to identify. A lot of people are using it. So yeah, let's go back to the slides.
Is there a reason why they're not actually like labeled with its like own color?
I guess it sounds cool to say danger. That's pretty much it. That's the best idea that I have behind it. Yeah, it's really subjective. All right. So questions on how do I get access to Bootstrap CSS styles, and how do I use CSS styles? All right, because we are going to do a real quick exercise. Just like last class, you should have access to activity 11. You can use that as a base template if you want, or start from scratch. I would probably prefer that you guys use 11 as a template, but you create a brand new HTML file and walk through the process of adding CSS to your file, and then picking any Bootstrap component that you would like to play with. I'm going to re-slack out the link to Bootstrap so that you have it. So let's go to the docs. Get Bootstrap, blah, 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 not 4.1. I don't want that. Nope, let's go to 3.6. Nope, they don't have that. There we go. All right, just slacked out some documentation behind some of the stuff you can play around with Bootstrap. We're going to spend the next 5 minutes just building a simple HTML template, linking Bootstrap to your website, and then just grabbing any one of their components and throwing it on the page and just seeing what it does. And I'm just going to walk around, so if anyone has any issues with that, just let me know, and I can help you out.
So this is version 3.3.6, like where the old newer links, like if you put in the link for 4.7, will encompass everything from before it.
The only reason I'm using 3.3.6 is because that's what a lot of your slides refer to, and so the class names have changed. So things like text center is no longer text center, and that just adds to the confusion.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Everybody good?
Oh, okay. Oh, this tag here is just okay.
Any questions over here?
Okay. We'll walk through that in class. I never did before, but I think. Yeah. Okay. I'll walk through that again. That's good information.
All right. So I just want to do this quick warm up exercise to kind of get a good idea on where you guys are when it comes to, because you're gonna hear this phrase a lot. I need you guys to throw up a real quick website and do X, Y, Z. The throwing up a real quick website needs to be quick. So I'm gonna walk through that exercise of spinning that website up because I need to make sure you guys have the foundational parts good. So first things first, where do I find Bootstrap? And there's multiple versions of Bootstrap. For the purpose of this boot camp and a lot of the exercises and homeworks and slides, they all refer to a very specific version of boot camp, which would be version 3. The latest version in version 3, I believe is 3.3.6, the one I slacked out, but let's just confirm, let's make sure that I'm not just giving you all faulty information. So when I look up Bootstrap 3, and maybe you guys want to follow along and walk through this Google process with me because you're going to do this a lot when you look up documentation. So if you type in Bootstrap 3, click on that, you'll see that the current version is actually 3.3.7. Not a big difference, but let's always just use the latest. So now we'll know that we're at the website getbootstrap.com/docs/3.3. I didn't have to memorize that. All I did was go to Google, typed in Bootstrap 3, and the very first link they gave me is the reference to the latest version of Bootstrap 3 that we want to use. Once again, to reiterate, the reason we're using Bootstrap 3, an older version versus Bootstrap 4, is because, one, most of your homework slides and exercises refer to Bootstrap 3. Two, most companies right now are still using Bootstrap 3 because it's been around the longest. And 4 has a lot of major changes to class names. So things like Text Center, I don't believe is called Text Center anymore. It's a completely different name. And that will only confuse you and your teammates later on down the line if you have Bootstrap 4 and he has Bootstrap 3 and things are just colliding. So for everybody's sanity, just use Bootstrap 3. So now, how do I find the link that I want to use for Bootstrap? Well, you have two options. One, you could download Bootstrap, the actual file itself, but the simplest solution, which is the one we recommend, is using the CDN. What is a CDN? I always forget the acronym because I already know what it does, but let's just look it up for class purposes. Content Delivery Network. A content delivery network means that Bootstrap is guaranteeing you that they will always have this file readily available for you when you need it. So when someone accesses your website and is going to pull down a Bootstrap information, Bootstrap is guaranteeing that they will provide you the file. You don't have to download it and keep it on your computer. And that's what this link does. This is the link that you're going to copy and paste into your header. So let's build a real quick website or HTML file. So let me get out of here. Does this text color, is this going to bother people with the green on white? Can everyone read it?
Yeah.
All right, much better. All right, let's make this, bring this down a little bit. All right. So we're going to first say test.html. That's going to build my file. I use Sublime Text. You guys can use whatever you want. I know some of y'all are using Visual Studio Code, something like that. Sublime test.html is going to bring up my file. Now in here, I'm just going to copy and paste some template because you're going to see this over and over again. And then let's get rid of all of this. Get rid of all of that. So this at its core is a simple HTML template. When you open this up in your browser, you're going to see nothing because nothing is actually being written on the page except for the HTML core tags. When you do inspect, and once again, is this new to a lot of people? Google Developer Tools. Okay. Let's follow along. Follow along with me right now. Open up whatever warm-up website you created in your Chrome browser, and then if you go to File, actually, or is it File? No, you'll see these three buttons on the right side. If you go there, you'll go to More Tools, and you'll see something called Developer Tools. This is your very best friend as you're learning to become a junior full stack developer or a junior front-end developer, because it's going to give you access to see the HTML tags on the page. So when you click Developer Tools, it's going to tell you, if you look at in the Elements tab, let's try and make this bigger. There we go. It's going to give you your HTML file. Right now I have nothing in there. I'm going to bring that up just to show you guys. All that's on my page right now is my HTML tag, my header, and my body. And that is exactly what's in the elements. When you mouse over it, it'll tell you, this is my body tag, is all the way up here. There's nothing there. Now, I'm going to take this CDN from Bootstrap, because I know this is the only way I'm going to be able to use Bootstrap class names is by providing a reference to it in my HTML template. So I'm going to copy and paste this link over here. I'm going to paste it in my header tags, because that's where all CSS goes. Save that page, refresh it, and now I have a link to my CSS. Just to confirm this has done exactly what I needed to do, there's another useful tab over here called Sources. If you click that, you'll see that there's a link to Bootstrap over here. This is my test HTML file that you saw earlier with a link to Bootstrap. This is my actual Bootstrap code presented to me. One more time, I'm going to remove this. I want to show you that it gets populated. Yeah. Let's refresh the page. The only thing on this page is my HTML file. I have no references to any other files. I have no links to any other files. I have no divs, no buttons, no tables. Now, I'm going to add a link to Bootstrap. I'm going to refresh the page. And now I have access to use Bootstrap CSS. That's how you're connecting Bootstrap to your HTML template. Questions on that?
Is it possible that we can add stuff in the elements?
In the elements.
Directly in the website?
Yeah, I mean, you could play around with developer tools and add elements directly here if you want. That's probably more of an advanced case. For the most part, I could just see students just editing things over here and refreshing the page and calling it a day. Because whatever you edit within the developer tools doesn't get saved to your file. It's just temporary. You can still copy and paste it into your file. Yeah, you can do that too. Question?
How come you protect or other classes not affected by Bootstrap class?
Yes, so if you create a class that is the same name as a Bootstrap class, you can have some overriding issues. So you just have to be careful about stuff like that. Does that answer your question or not?
Yeah, it answers that. Like, I did some Bootstrap in my work also. So
Okay.
it's coming just completely with like different.
So I didn't want to get into this so early, but there's a tag in CSS called exclamation point important, and what that does is if you create a text center class and Bootstrap has a text center class, if you use exclamation point important on your own CSS class, it will override the Bootstrap class, and then it would for every text center class name in your HTML, it'll use what you have. If you just create a class name with text center, you may or may not see the CSS that you created. Was there any other questions? I thought you had one earlier.
No, I just wanted to add that the code reads down, so the further down the class is, that's the one that overrides the one on top.
Correct.
So that context, we'll learn that later on.
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned earlier, when your file loads, it loads from the top down. So if you state like a class name over here that is similar with a Bootstrap class name over here, then I can't actually remember which one gets executed first, but I feel like the last one would override the first one. Yeah, the last one would override the first class name, and then that's what you would see on your page. So, any other questions on linking CSS to your HTML template?
So, is there a way to reach into the style sheet to edit it, or do we just overwrite?
Yeah,
like,
so
the style sheet of our own
you could download it
download?
and just link it directly to you from within your local computer, and then just edit all the files if you wanted. Yeah.
Is it easier to just create a secondary style sheet of your own, so you don't have to deal with the hundreds of lines? You can just kind of focus on like a couple of things. Can you overwrite other rules that's already set up?
Yeah, so I mean, you can write a whole bunch of custom CSS if you wanted. That could overwrite Bootstrap code. Like for example, let's see. Let's link a simple CSS file. 1 second. Let's do touch test.css. Get rid of this. All right, 1 second. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, so I have this test HTML file, and I also have a test.css, and you could build as many CSS files as you want, and you could link them within your HTML tag, and within those, you could override what Bootstrap currently has. If I downloaded Bootstrap, it would sit alongside my test file over here, and then you would just edit that directly, just link it directly into your HTML. So it would no longer download the one from their source of origin. It would just use the file that you have on your local computer. Any other questions before we move on? Cool. All right. So we've done this warm-up just to get you guys familiar on how to link Bootstrap into your page. So now we're going to talk a little bit about sketching. Well, not necessarily sketching, but more so grid design. Let's go to a website. Let's go to, I don't know. What's your favorite website? Yes.
Oh.
Oh, you have your own website? All right, let's take a look. Let's take a look at your website. Julian? .d or just D? All right. Oh, is there more or is it loading? Okay, cool. So this is Julian's website. One thing you can already see, well, if we were to turn this into a host of grids and rows, as you see over here, let's try and point out what we can see. One, we know that there's a column over here for the navigation. I'm assuming it's what's going on over here. And then, as you can see, there seems to be like multiple rows. One row for Julian's name, one row for his title, and then another row for his social icons. Every single website on the internet is based on rows and columns. He's structuring his website in a way that makes sense for him, but also he's taking advantage of the fact that you can think of this as like an Excel spreadsheet. And this is just empty space over here in this row and column that he's making for his name in one row and column, and then his last name in another row and column. If we go to, if we take a look at this grid over here, this is pretty much what we're going to be learning how to use, what to use Bootstrap for, to be able to structure our website in a way that we can align information that we need in the places that we want. So, for example, in this particular row, we're going to have the logo. Within the same row, but in a longer column, you're going to have the navigation. And then this is going to be another row over here of just one column. and then this would be a third row with 3 columns, and then finally a fourth row with no columns. Let's get past this. So this the art of doing this is called wireframing. As I mentioned before, most websites are all just grids and rows. And then, as you saw in the example earlier in Facebook, Facebook is a huge fan of rows and columns. You'll notice in this design that there's multiple rows and multiple columns within columns, and so on and so forth. All of this is possible with Bootstrap. So for the very first activity, I'm going to slack out. Well, this isn't even an activity. This is just going to be some fun that we play around with today. I'm going to slack out this link over here called Framebox to the general channel. And in here, I would like you guys to sketch out the website you did for your homework. We're going to spend 5 minutes. Take a look at the homework, or I can even throw up the slide of what the homework was supposed to look like. I think the very first page with the cat or something. Let's take a look. So yeah, if you want to use this as an example, feel free. But I want you to sketch out this website within this, using this website Framebox. And I am going to sketch something out myself while you guys are doing that. So everyone go to framebox.org. We'll spend 5 minutes sketching out what your homework #1 website looked like. It's a good practice to get into a habit of sketching your websites out first instead of just implementing, because when you have like an example of what you want your site to look like, and you maybe talk to like a stakeholder or talk to the person that wants you to build a website, or even just to get an idea of what you think the site is supposed to look like, you'll begin to notice issues or errors before you even begin to write a single line of code that you can resolve just within the drawing itself. This is also good practice for when you're doing group projects and you haven't had time to build the website itself, but just to get a point across to your teammates. It's nice to sketch it out just so that everybody's on the same page. Okay, we're going to quickly move ahead because there's a lot of information to get through today. But you get the general idea. You're able to get a quick mock-up of what you want your website to look like. And there's better websites than Framebox out there to do it. There's better prototyping websites. You could use Photoshop. There's a thing called Balsamic. Most of the time, if you're a designer, that's what you're going to do for your client. You're never going to write any code first and then tell your client, okay, here, I have your website. You want to mock it up first, because clients don't always know what they want. You could build a website, spend many, many months doing it, and they'll tell you, this isn't exactly my vision. But if you had a prototype, you could talk about the prototype, make changes, and get it to a place that you both can agree before you even write a single line of code. So,
Change the font size, things like that within this framework, or is it just a set size?
this is a limited website, so I think there's only a little bit you can do with it. This is just for like exercise purposes. Just drag and drop just to get an idea. Yeah, but I believe the boot camp should provide you a user code to use for a better prototyping tool called Balsamic, and I'll try and get information on that, on how to get that to you guys. But so a friend of mine reached out to me. He says, hey, Emmanuel, I need you to build me a very, very simple, minimalistic website. He wanted to base it off some Drake site. And I was like, sure, I can build you something really quick. Because I'm not very artistically inclined, so I was like, I can build simple websites, not something complicated. So I could easily throw up a different mock-up like this and say, okay, I'm going to have your logo at the top. I'm going to have some links in the center. And at the very bottom is going to be social icons. I can send him this mock-up so he can get an idea of what the website's going to look like. And if he says, sure, build me this website, and they can go like, okay, cool. This is your website. Mock-up, website. Logo at the top, some links to go to some places, social links over here. Mock-up, website, mock-up, website. I think it's pretty impressive. They look exactly the same. But you get the idea. You don't want to write code first before you do a mock-up that you guys can agree on. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it just needs to give an idea of what to expect. So that's the idea behind that. Moving on, let me point out the link to the better prototyping tool that I believe you guys should have access to. It'll be in the slides. It's this link over here called Balsamic. I'm going to post that in Slack as well. Just some other examples. We use Framebox. There's something called pen and paper, which is your notebook. You can use Photoshop. There's guides for stuff like that. You can use Illustrator. There's a lot of options out there. But let's go to Balsamic because I used to use that when I was in university. They used to let you have a free trial. Now you have to sign up. But so you could sign up for 30 days just to play around with what they got. We should also be able to provide you guys with a link to play around with it as well. I have to really look into that. Let's see if this loads.
Ideas. A simple but invaluable step, which saves you from
So as you can see, they have
wasting a bunch of time and money coding the
a
wrong
better
code.
suite of icons you can drag
Balsamic is
and
the
drop.
industry-leading solution for fast,
So much better than
approachable,
Framebox. You can
collaborative
change the
online
font if you want, as you mentioned
The app is
earlier, change the
incredibly
text
easy
size.
to use.
Really get
If you
a
can use Microsoft
close-looking
Office,
prototype to
you
the
can use
website or
Balsamic.
whatever project it
You
is
won't
that you're
believe
building,
how fast you can whip up
so you
screens
can
and
wow
web
your
pages.
clients, so on and
We
so
compete
forth.
with pencil and paper,
So
and we win.
everybody
We
get
keep
the
things at low
gist. Raise your
fidelity so
thumbs
people
up if
don't get
everything's
hung
all
up on
good. We'll
details
move
too
on.
early in
Cool.
the process, and they don't confuse your wireframes for the final design.
So check that out at your leisure. We're going to talk a little bit more about rows and columns. So when you look at this website, you're going to notice that it has a whole bunch of rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 rows over here. The reason we're going to keep iterating over rows and columns is because this ties directly into Bootstrap. As I said earlier, when you take a look at your prototype, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. Then we'll walk through it and we'll see that there's multiple columns within the rows. At the very top, we have one big column, another big column over here, and then we have multiple columns within this specific row. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 columns within this row. 4 over here, 2 over here, and then 1 over here. The way Bootstrap works is that mathematically within every row they say you're allowed 12 columns. So of this row we use 1 of 12. Of this row we use 1 of 12. Over here we used 8 of 12. Now if we had all the 12 columns exactly within here, we would fit Bootstrap's quota. But if you went over that, then you would begin to see layout misalignment. And we'll get into how you can take advantage of that, because within this column itself, you can also have multiple rows. And then within those rows, you could have 12 columns. That's kind of how they do things. But before we get too deep into that,
Can you not have an odd number of columns?
you can, but as long as they add up to 12 eventually, you'll be fine.
So it's gonna be just spaced too, right?
Yeah, they space them out by 12 columns. So now within this website, you'll see that there are 4 rows. Awesome stories ever made with the image over here, and then the social links at the bottom. Now when it comes to columns, how many at the top? How many in the center? And then 1 at the bottom for the social links.
Can you have a question?
Mm?
What if the text is going like float?
If you're floating it to like where?
The picture, the text, the paragraph.
Around the picture. So do you mean like, so for example, if this like floated like
Yes,
down here,
correct.
then that would just be one big column. That would just be one big column, because it's now overflowing into this column over here. The text isn't going to be on a separate row, because it's not necessarily, because it's all part of the same paragraph. You're just floating the text around the image. So in that specific situation, it would be one big column. Any questions on that?
Should we think about it more like when you float it, you're fixing the way it looks, not so much the structure of it? Like it's still
No, you always want to think about the structure, because if you're using Bootstrap layouts, everything needs to add up mathematically to be either, how can I explain this? You want to make sure that if you do have a lot of information on the page, that they're structured in a way that you can put each piece of information in a single column or row. That's how you want to structure it. When we start actually going through the exercise, things will start making more sense than just seeing things like this on the slides. So let's actually dive right into that, because these examples are pretty basic. You can see clearly that there's one row at the top. In this center piece, you have 2 columns, and then within that second column, there's multiple rows and columns themselves. So even though this says 2 over here, which is counting 2 separate columns, within this column itself, you can see there's 1, 2, 3 rows, and within those rows, there's 2 individual columns themselves. So 2 columns here, but 2 columns as a whole. Y'all get that? All right. So now let's play around with Bootstrap a little bit. Is this the best place to start? Yeah. So in Bootstrap, they have a concept called a container. And you can think of a container as something that encompasses the content that you want to present on the page. Within that content, you're going to have those rows and columns that we spoke about earlier. So in this website, you can think of this as one big container for everything you see in pink. And within that container, you're defining rows and columns. Those rows and columns, their class names are actually just rows and col in Bootstrap, which add up to 12. Now, what does that mean, adding up to 12? So you'll notice, actually I won't even get up for this, that with the full width, well, in this specific example, if you have something of column column MD12. What does this mean? This means that we're defining a column. We're going to say it takes up the full length of the 12 columns listed over here, and that it's for a medium device, a medium screen size. We won't worry about that center number so much for this particular class. We're only going to worry about whether it's a column and what does it add up to. So now you'll notice that for the second example, call and 4 is a third of 12. So it's only going to take up a third of the screen. That's how it kind of maths things out. So for example, you're going to have, this would be call 4, call 4, call 4. With half width, that's going to be half of 12. So this would be call 6, call 6. Now, this specific column over here is 2/3 of 12. So that would be 8, this would be 8, call 8, and then this would be call 4. Does anyone have questions so far on what we're just going through? Because the way Bootstrap helps you lay out your website is by making sure that you have taken full advantage of all the columns that you have available to you within that row. And you know you can only go up to 12. So you can think of your entire website length as a column of 12. And you're just breaking it up into individual small pieces. So for this specific example, this would be row 1, column 12. This would be row 2, but then this specific icon would be column 6. This entire box over here would be column 6. But within column 6, it's going to have its own rows. 1 row, 2 row, 3 row. And since this is half of that row, this would be column 6, and this would be column 6. Even though the parent, the entire thing, adds up to 12. So this would be column 6 for this specific row. This would be column 6 as a whole for this one row. But within these individual pieces, they have their own rows. And this would be column 6, and this would be column 6. Does that make sense? Say what?
They're like nested?
Yes, they're nested. So that's kind of what I mean by saying that mathematically they all add up to 12, because you're breaking your website into individual grids. So you kind of have like a spreadsheet of your website. Question?
When you write it out, do the rows have to be, when you're writing the HTML, do the rows have to be next to each other? Like if you have, can you go back to that?
Which one? This one?
Last example you were looking at. So for row 2, are you saying call 6 with big guy?
Yes.
And then right next to it, are you putting another tag for?
For another tag for a row within the second column.
Okay.
Yeah.
But up top, you would just say for column 1, you're just saying call 12, and that's it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So this would be 1 row tag, 1 column tag to 12. This would be another row tag with 2 column tags, 1 6, another 1 6, and within the second column, you would have multiple rows and multiple columns because those are now nested within that column.
Basically, there's going to be another deep inside, right?
Correct.
So
Question?
it's really in the second column 6. So it's 4 additional rows with and divvied up into 2 columns. Since there's
Correct.
2 images for 2 for each row. So it's rows and columns.
Yep.
Is there a limit? Since there's a limit to columns, is there a limit to rows?
No, no limit.
You could just
As many rows as you want, as many columns as you want. As long, well, no, not as many columns as you want. Up to 12.
up to 12.
Yes,
But rows.
as many as you need. All right. So I wish you guys had paper because we could just have done an exercise on paper of divvying this website out into rows and columns. But maybe it's easier if we dive into code. I always think things a lot easier when I start writing stuff. So as I mentioned earlier, as a refresher, we have a container, we have a row, and then you have multiple columns within that row. Columns can only be within rows. There's a specific order to this. You can't have this backwards. You can't have rows and columns outside of containers. You can't have defined your column before you defined your row, because Granted, you could, but Bootstrap won't understand what you're doing correctly, and you'll see strange behavior. Remember, when it comes to software development, you can pretty much do what you want, but if you don't read the instructions, you're not going to see the result that you're looking for. So let's see if I can give you guys a quick activity. No, I don't want to explain rows and columns. Let me draw something up real quick for you guys. Let's see. Is there an activity we can take advantage of? Quick is, let's look at that. P tag. Let's see, this is column 2. Open the browser. Whoops. Alright, so this is div row, blah, 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 blah. Let's get rid of this. Okay. Well, actually, let's just use what was there before. Yeah, let's just do that. Let's get rid of this. Alright, let's go to quick reveal and finder. Alright, I'm going to post a HTML file within the general channel, and I would like everybody to bring that up, because this is going to be the file that we play around with, at least for the next 5 minutes. I'll just give you guys a few seconds just to download that, and then we'll walk through it. Alright, so within this, let's see, let me make sure everything is where I want it to be. We have 1 row, 2 rows, blah, blah, blah. So on this page, what do you see? Without even looking at the code very much, what can I tell is going on? How many rows, how many columns do you see? 2 rows, how many columns? What was that? Where? In the second row. What can we assume if you were to break this up into 12? Let's say the very first column is column 12. What would the space be of these columns? 6 and 6, because that adds up to 12. So this is just going to be basic math that we're going to use within our HTML. If you open up the HTML, you'll see that within our container, because remember, your container is the very first thing that you're going to define. Your container says, within this container, I'm going to have this amount of information. Just to reiterate over the slides, container first, row next, then columns. So within the very first row, I'm going to do these side by side. We're going to have this text over here that says I am column 1, and then within the row I'm going to have a class column 12. It's going to span across the website. Then within the second row I'm going to have another div of column 6, and then the first column would be column 6, and the second column would be column 6. So they would take up half the page. We have one section over here, another section over there. If we inspect it, oops, let me get rid of all this other stuff. You'll notice that with basic highlighting, you can highlight the very first row, and the second row would be here, and you can highlight the individual columns. That's how much space they take up on the page. Now, let's add to this example. So I want you guys to follow along. We're going to add a third row. It's going to be a div. And this div is going to have the class row to say that we're adding a third row to the page. And then within that row, we're now, for this exercise, we're going to add 4 columns. So what would be the math behind 4 columns in a row? Call 3, because 3 times 4 equals 12. So you would do, whoops, column 3 over here. And let's just add some text over here. Column 1 of 4. 1, 2, 3. Save the page. So then when I refresh, you can now see that I have 4 individual columns on the page. And when I look at that row within my inspector and mouse over them, you'll see it mouses over 4 individual columns that's across the page. Now, the nice thing about Bootstrap is that it also accounts for mobile responsiveness. That's probably one of the key features on why people use Bootstrap, because mobile responsiveness can be a real pain to code, because you need to write CSS specific to the screen size that you have in front of you. So if I was to reduce this screen size to like something of a mobile phone, you'll see that the page continues to squeeze into, the content begins to squeeze into a format that's potentially readable to your users. But so let's say this was a typical phone screen. It would look like this, with the first row being kind of scrunched up and the others. But you'll notice that they maintain their structure though. You still have 4 columns. You still have 2 columns. You still have 1 column. They've just been squashed together. But on a bigger screen, of course, you have more real estate. But the structure itself maintains the same. Even if you got it really, really, really tight, I mean, you would lose your data, but the structure itself remains the same. Any questions on that? So in our next example, we're going to add, let's see, we're going to use odd numbers now. So let's add another row, just that you guys can see some stuff. So in the next row, we're going to have maybe column 5. So let's say, and then let's see, this would be column 7. They all don't have to be multiples. They don't have to be divisible. They can just be random numbers as long as they add up to 12. That's all we care about. So 1 of 2, 2 of 2. So when I refresh this page, you'll see that this column is exactly half of 12. This column is exactly half of 12. This column over here is not necessarily half of 12. So you'll notice that the real estate it takes up is just a little bit less than 6 over here. So if I inspect it, you'll see how do I do this? There we go. This column over here, this encompasses real estate up to that point on the page, but the one with a column of 5 only takes up that amount because it has to make space for the column of 7, which is right next to it, which takes up more space than that. That's how you begin to move information around the page to structure it the way you want it to. Now, I didn't necessarily even have to have column 7 over here. I can remove column 7, and Bootstrap will automatically know that this is column 5, so I'm going to give it the space that it requires, but I'm just going to leave the rest of that space as if something was there adding up to 12. So then if I added another row over here, it would just continue with the same structure that you see on the page, building out the rows and the individual columns, but leaving this information as padded. So just for so don't feel like when you have a row, you have to make sure that the math adds up to 12. Bootstrap will automatically assume that just because that you have stated a row of 5, and it'll assume the rest of the space for that row will just leave blank until you add some information there. Questions on that? Cool. So I would like you guys to spend the next 5 minutes just kind of building your own examples, playing around with different column sizes. And then after those 5 minutes, we'll begin to touch a little bit on what exactly MD or LG or XS means when it comes to screen size. But don't worry about that just yet. Just worry about the rows and columns and the math up to 12 for 5 minutes. And talk amongst yourselves. You can think of this as a group activity. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Is that better? Question? Question?
Can you remind me about the class name of the offset? The class name of offset? Which offset? Oh, like the column offset? Oh, okay. Okay, I'll look it up. I just wondering if you can remember.
Yeah, that's a good exercise. Nah, I barely remember these class names for CSS. Question? So. Yeah. This is pointing at something. Let's try. Maybe that's actually
okay. So go back. So go back to the I mean, go back to So
okay, that looks
this is set up how it's supposed to be. So if you look at it right here, you see how you just use space. Think about it. Go back here. Go back to the code. So look at it right now.
just a
You're
tab.
on the F12, all right? So if you had up to 12, each one's going to be even space 3, 3, 3, 3. Okay, so right here, you inside of a row. Like I explained the guy back there. This is just slicing. This is like a local grid. And you put this in under the parallel sections of 3. So you have 4 equal sections. So go back to your code now. If you look at it right there, you kind of visually, you see how these are already pushing the ends over? That's right.
Okay, so it's really the size of the text.
Right here, what happened was because you blew this up, it's stretching your columns, it's making them do a text way. You see what I'm saying? But right here,
sometimes you
it's
get a
perfect.
little lost in CSS. Okay.
Yeah.
And then just keep trying to replicate that with our own idea.
If you look like one up like 72, you'll know that let's try to start pushing these up because it's trying to adjust. So right here, he has a show, go back to your code, because when I added it, he has a show, he shows you, but he hasn't put this one here. You see the show, that means even the space. Until you start to see it over there, medium column, large column, or small column. Right now, you're just saying give me an even space column.
All right, 2 more minutes and then we'll move on. Let's see. Outside of that row, so within that another row.
In the first one, I'm trying to make two more. I'm trying to make two more and let it go two rows instead of like columns.
What did you want this to look like?
Yeah, the first one that already made, I want to make two more.
Two more rows. Or
Two more columns. That's what I'm trying to do.
Oh, okay. So you want to make sure.
One and all, it's not another one. Yeah. Why
Okay.
just showing the two rows?
So then you need another row within that first column. Because you have one row stated here, then within this first column, you're now defining more columns, but remember, columns only live within rows. So after column 2,
Oh, I
define
need to, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure.
This blended into each other.
Okay, is that because it's screen size?
I mean,
Oh, okay, so you still like that. Okay. So let's see what's going on. So you have one row, one column of 1, another column of 7, and then another column of 4.
looks like this 10. It says it's encroaching on.
Yeah. Let's see what's going on.
Yeah, this 2 is.
So you have a column, you have one row that has 2 columns of 10 and 2, so it's taking up the full real estate. And then within that same row, you have now some more information. So that's not going to work. You already used up the real estate for that first row. So you need to either move this information within one of these columns or move them out of that row.
But this, I thought this was this.
Oh, that flows over there.
Yeah. So this one. Yeah, it's time you break this
Yeah, it shouldn't. I'm trying to see.
Unless I ran out of pages. It doesn't scroll up or
I
down.
want to know where this 4 is.
What I noticed is
So that 4 is that 1. Scroll up. Is there some more information? So this row is closed over there. This row, that's another div. Okay, so that's just an empty div. Slap me your code. Let me take care of it. Questions? Yeah, it should. Okay, so that's there.
First one, I start to use the already instead of the row first and then inside to close. Because the first one, write down 50, 60 words.
Did you slack me your
Yeah,
code?
I sent it to the group.
All right. Let me take a look. Ah, that's not gonna work for me.
Try now. At the end of the thing, slash up there. Type
So I have a row over here. It's the second row.
So,
if anything, submit that one.
Yeah.
But it's just the word. For a while.
Within this row. Okay. All right. I'll get back to you on where's that guy at? Oh, there we go. I'll get back to you on that and we'll try to figure it out.
Yeah, no worries. I think because I added another row, I think I'm out of rows. It's also putting it on the side.
That would be, I would imagine it would just go down the page.
Yeah, I would imagine too, but I'm not getting a scroll feature. And
Yeah.
the next, I made another row and again put it all to the right.
Okay, we'll figure it out. All right. So, moving on. Let's see. So, we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly LG means within here. So, you could think of these different references as like the viewing size. So, for a medium-sized page, you would have a column of, it would break it up into columns of 4. You could say if this is like a large, if the viewing size is large, you can do different types of things. But I think the easiest way for me to explain what that is by showing you guys an example, because that's really what helps connect the dots. So let me try and find a good example of this. Not that. Not number 14. I don't want to do that. Okay, let me revert all the stuff I did in this instructor grid. Okay. So in that very first example I showed you before, we had those 2 individual columns over here on the second row, and then the 1 column of 12 on a medium-sized page. And if you scroll it out, it looks like so. Now, if I used LG, let's see what changes. LG would mean that I have a very, very large screen. And you'll see it remains the same. Now, if I change that code or created a brand new row with things like, if it's a small screen, let's say you only have a very, very small screen, then we would give it a column of 1 and then a column of 2. So what I expect to see, let's get rid of this one. Whoops, I'm actually editing the wrong section. Let's get rid of this row over here. Alright, this is the code we care about. Let's create a new row. Let me say for a page that is small, we're going to give this a column of 1 and 2. So it should only take up just the left side of the screen. So when we refresh the page, you'll notice that they are squeezed over to the left side, and as we make it smaller, you'll notice that, well, actually, let's make this 6 and 6, maybe more so. Save this. Okay, so this is probably a better example, and actually let me make a third row of large. Large screen size. Okay. So it's all about, for the most part, the padding. We're saying that with a very, very large amount of view size, we can take up most of the screen, but when your screen is smaller, then the columns are closer together to allow for better reading. You're going to see more drastic situations of this when you are able to view a website in different mediums, whether that's a mobile phone, whether that's a desktop, or whether that's a projector. I'll try and find you guys a better demo of that that really shows the differences between the size that you're viewing on the page and the structure of your website. But for now, we're going to do an exercise number 17 before we take a break. Well, not 17, exercise 14. And this is going to be the layout that we're using. It's going to be a header with how many rows and how many columns do you see immediately in front of you. So over here, how many columns? So what would be the column size of this one? So it would be one row with column 4, column 4, column 4, which adds up to 3. Now, on the next row, what would be the column size? It would be 3 on each of them. And then the last one. So you guys are going to build this website. I want to say you're going to build a simple website. As I said earlier, you're going to create an HTML file. You're going to link the Bootstrap CSS. And you're going to use that previous example that I slacked out to you guys over here just as a template. But you're going to pretty much build this information that you see on the page right here. And I'm going to slack out a reference so where you can just get like some dummy text to do so. So I'm going to leave this up, and then I'm going to give you guys the website. I believe it's Lorem Ipsum. There we go. Which is just a basic text generator. Yeah, and you can just grab like dummy text to throw on a page just to kind of show the volume of content that could potentially be on a page. So for the next 20 minutes, activity 14, correct. We're gonna use Twitter Bootstrap to create the layout, and we're gonna say what? Question?
I was wondering if there was a unsolved version because I don't.
No, there isn't an unsolved version. You're gonna create that template.
Oh, okay.
So as I mentioned earlier, create the HTML file, inject your HTML template with a link to Bootstrap, and you're gonna use columns and rows to build out this page for the next 20 minutes. So I've slacked out the link for Lorem Ipsum where you can get like some default text just to throw on the page. Does anyone have any questions on what we're doing right now? This is just another activity on using containers, rows, and columns to structure your website. Question?
Let's get rid of that. Where's your piece of the end piece?
basically we need to create just limiting the rows and columns.
Yes.
Oh,
Like a simple little example here. And I got this to work, but I only got it to work after making it the link to the 4.0.
Yeah.
It seems to
Oh, really?
Yeah, it seems to work totally differently. Like, so if I went out and do this version instead, like it's all like the call 6 row or call 6 and call 4 and all that stuff didn't seem to like actually lie, like they're all the same.
That's interesting. Let's take a look at the
It's
sources.
in a way. Here's a fact.
Yeah, let me show you. Let me confirm something really quick. Does it want? Good call on that one.
Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. So let's take a look at Bootstrap 4. Oh, wait a second. Got it.
Oh, it's gonna be right, so
So, like you said, 3.
Yeah.
So now we have 3 stable here, we have right, next column.
Yeah, it seemed to put everything, like this column 6 was still all the way across.
Mhm.
Column 4 was below it, like another row down, basically, but not below it, but below it, and it was the same width as well if I like went to inspect it. Yours is working with the same
Yeah. Did you open up? Did you open up the example that I sent you earlier?
let's change the link over there because it seems like the notes are wrong. Let's comment that out.
That puts you back on the
I can't remember if it's the same syntax. Where did you get the piece link at before?
Oh wait, I'm doing this in the wrong spot. Sorry. I think I did earlier. Oh, it is a server sentence.
See, so something is broken because there's no let me slack a different link to you.
What's your name in class?
Nolan.
No. All right. Try this.
Try that link instead. That's what I got that right on your side. It's like the CSS isn't being added at all.
Right.
Yeah, because you'll notice when I refresh my page, that is no different.
Because no, this is what like I would expect to see.
Yeah.
With the 3.3. So.
I'm like, what's different?
Yeah. I didn't mess.
What browser are you using, you said?
Chrome.
Yeah. Like this has no style at all.
Yeah.
Let's open up your console. Let's go console tab. Sources. And if you open up this drop down, that's 3.7. Let's look at your elements. Look at last one. Yes. It's not immediately obvious what's going on.
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen this behavior. You want to open this up in Safari?
I don't have Safari. I think the only thing
Yeah,
is
Edge. Okay, so I guess for the point of this particular class, you'll have to use 4.0.
Okay.
But I believe the syntax is different before.
Gotcha.
There's something called flexbox. Let me look that up real quick.
Let's see. Bootstrap. Great. Okay. Looks like they added something called container fluid, but we don't care about that right now. So you're good with just the old syntax before.
Okay.
So let's just do that for now for you.
Okay.
Okay. Hey, Ansala. So I just opened up your page, and was this what you were expecting?
Yeah.
Hmm.
You opened it up and it came up.
Yeah. So is maybe your screen size too small?
Sorry.
Is maybe your screen size too small? You want to open it up bigger, or?
My screen was.
Yeah, because all you're doing over here is you just have this placeholder code, and then you have the.
Oh, you know what? It worked now.
It worked now? Oh,
I don't know. Probably the screen is not touched.
okay, cool. Yeah, I was wondering. That seemed really strange.
Yeah.
Okay, sure, no problem. All right. And did you end up figuring out your issue?
No, that one? No.
Yeah. Okay. I'll spend some time trying to figure that out. All right.
Whereas this just like does everything. Because then I spend all the time just like backspacing all the time. Right, whenever I do like control C, control V, so he just showed me alt shift down and it just copies it straight down and doesn't do the indentation. It's really nice. Because it drives me crazy because I'm super busy almost. Spend all that time. Yeah. Oh, well,
Oh. Okay. I figured out your issue. So, oh no.
I was like,
Right.
mine.
So you had that piece of code within the second row. So
Oh,
everything
it's
was
all
completely
the same.
squashed. So yeah, see if you look at the screen, if I grab this out of that second row and move it outside to its own individual row, then you have what you were looking for, which is this. Yeah. But if I move it back,
Thought that,
then you have that squash.
And
Yeah.
again, I thought I was.
So that's where things become a little tricky. You gotta make sure that the indents kind of like line up and all that.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Commenting
oh,
on
I
where
forgot
the
about the
rows
touch
begin.
screen.
Yes.
I was like, why did it just do
And sometimes these like there's an IDE called WebStorm by JetBrains. It has auto indenting, and that really helps save a lot of these issues.
Well, the VS Code is auto indented.
Oh, they auto indenting too?
Yeah, and they even have this, because that's why I didn't think I was mixed up, because
Yeah.
they tell you, like when you highlight one,
Yeah.
right, it tells you where the opening and the closing is.
Okay.
So you go here.
Yeah, so
it
that
tells
should
you.
help. But
So I didn't think I was out of place, cause,
Yeah.
but I guess I must have been.
Yeah. Mistakes happen. Yeah. It's all part of the process.
Indeed. So many processes.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so how come the height is always this small?
Why is it always that small? The entire page, mainly because you could always add styling to the text to make it bigger, and that would take up more space. You can add padding, so that can take up more space. It all depends on what you're trying to do. I guess right now it's just assuming that is making its own best guess on how you want to structure your page. You need to tell it like for this row, I need you all the way to the bottom. You would use more styling tags.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Sure.
Okay, sure. Oh, that's a huge picture. You need to now use custom CSS. You need to do it like I was happy with more.
but it's strange that it's not applying. So that's when clearly we see it disrespect.
Yeah. Although
It didn't even apply to one. At least for the last two.
I wasn't there.
Okay, then let me know when you solve it.
Because we've got some time.
So you have.
But it's still like moves a little bit, so enough where I can see it. Alright, cool. Thank you.
All right.
So you have three. How many votes do you have? You only have two.
Bootstrap. Not yet. We're still on activity time. Yeah. Oh, question? But we are moving right into our break after this.
Oh, yeah, small ball. Instead of large.
No idea why it's not like that.
Center?
So you can add borders.
Yeah.
Yeah, the header outside the container has fun. These individuals go right after the
I want to do homework right now.
last row.
So you have the header. Yeah, the header is a row of something. So the header belongs to the that each row is each div that has a row is separate. So if you want to make a new row, you have to make it separate.
Oh, you commented all that out, it's still staying the same? Because I'm assuming Bootstrap has some automatic.
So you have row 1 is the letter, row 2 is
Center and everything?
and row 4, and then row 3 is 6 columns. And then row 5.
All right, let me take a look. Let me see. All right, so we're gonna do break for like 45 minutes. So if you need to go get some food, definitely make it back to class by 12:30. But you could use this time to ask questions or to go eat, whatever you want. All right. So yeah, so it's automatic bootstrap styling. They always move. If you're within a container, they'll try and center everything for you. You can, because I know that.
I was trying to make the size of this screen like small, medium, large, something.
Not necessarily. So for example, if I look at the solved solution and I just got rid of all the rows, so let's get rid of all the rows, and all I have within my container is, let's get rid of all this stuff too. So it's very simple, just one container with a header. You'll see it's already centered a little bit, like there's still padding on the sides. Are you sure? One second. Let me grab 3.37 because I see in the solved solution they're using 4, and see if that makes a difference.
This one has 3.7, yeah.
Okay, so there's a slight difference, but it's still near the center of the page. Just bootstrap padding. If you don't like it, you'll have to override it.
I'm trying to extend.
Yeah, because the reason your header is all the way to the side is because it's outside the container. So if I do this other header outside the container, you'll see it starts at the very left side of the page. That container kind of centers everything. Yeah. So I guess it's one of the drawbacks, but also in some situations the benefits of Bootstrap, depending on what you want to do. You look like you have a question. How? Let me see.
Jack can come on. Okay, so all you're doing is within a container. Oh, you really need to have
The lesson you should learn is always use until the 3 years.
I'll do it. Just little things sometimes.
Like, you're not trying to just go off the top of your head.
Did anyone have any questions on this exercise?
6 classes.
All right.
You
had a question?
Are you gonna go?
You finished it?
teach it? I mean,
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah, I have to start. Old adage, fake it till you make it. Pretty much. Yeah. You go in, I had a friend, he worked, he spent 4 months in the boot camp, Alfred holding program, testing, debugging. And, he spent 4 months in the program, just got a job for $100,000. But, that's a big but, it's one of those, businesses that help build your resume. And there's a lot of experience in life that doesn't exist. But you got him through the door. And as long as you perform well, that the tasks that you do in your interview, it's not just behavior questions. It's also like, do this, do that, write this code, do that. So you have to prove yourself. But that just goes to show you, just make it till you make it. Yeah, well, there's the assumption that they're going to train you in what they do in their stack. As long as you're good at learning, you'll be fine. But there's such a need for people that just, okay, fine. Job is done. Well, I used to be a teacher in the center of Kentucky, but you go to school, you can understand why. You can understand why. You know, outside of some, when you have several kids, several grades back, everything, I don't know, if you're like 3 or 4 grades back in reading and math and science, I don't know how you do it. Huh? You're never going to catch up if you're in middle school and you can't get it. You're not be able to sit down and talk. You can't sit down and they just don't have the mechanical ability to use it. Well, you have the patience. You have to sit down and think about problems for hours on end until you're able to fix it. So it's not so much different. It's just a different process. But there's a lot of like computer but basically, you see that guy that hijacked the Jeep on the highway. Yeah, he was just driving down the road. It wasn't one of those stage things. He was just driving down the road. He hijacked the car's computers and took it over.
Yeah, 2. To be honest, 2. No, I want this link right here.
You gotta speak their language. The problem is a lot of people don't speak language.
Yeah, you make it. That's really hard to find.
Give me. That's good. That's why, because I want to see it live. And if it doesn't work, I want to take it. Hey, is everybody cool on your homework? How to publish it?
Sure, which
Okay, there's two links. The first link I need it actually to your repo. That's all of your code. Like give all of that. The second one here is actually once you make it public, copy that link. The reason you give both URLs is because if it works, we see it, it's fine. But if it's broken, you can always go back and look at the code and say, hey, you got it. If you cannot finish the homework, please don't force yourself over it. Try to single it out. This is basically saying you know what needs to be done. The best thing is don't feel like our class is. Sometimes you can spend up to 20 hours because you'll do it. Then as you continuously code, you'll go back and retract and like, oh, I can do it better. Go over the class exercises. So everything that he teaches you today, go back and review that. Like once you do the homework, it's cool, move on. But don't spend, if you spend more than 10 hours on homework, something's going on. Like go back, everything that he's teaching you is in the lesson plans. And a lot of people, you guys go to lesson plans. I know our class did, and we would just focus on homework. And it'd be like 20 some hours, which is sitting up here trying to figure out something very simple. So go back over everything that he's teaching you in the reports.
So you're like, you open the notes, and they can like, okay, I know what this is good or portfolio. And then the repository, the more like, well, I'm not like very
okay, but that's cool. So this is the link. This link right here. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. You can't write essays, but you can talk.
Scroll down to scroll down.
I think it's the best way. 6 months. It's one of the hardest things. We're not going to be experts, but a year from now, the point we learn it, we will be much better.
You want to copy
There's projects are not like we will get solved responses for all of them. So we'll get how to do it better. And my plan is just to mimic that until I get a piece of that. You know what I'm saying? We probably have an instinct for being around and an engine that is almost like a sixth sense. They just develop it. I'm just going to mimic it for that. So but for the projects, we don't have that. So unless you lean on your professor or your PA, you're not going to get it.
This is how.
Yeah, I'm on the rise all the time. I'm like, listen, I'm paying you a lot of money. This is going to be on my profile. So I want it to be good.
They don't have a generic one. I mean, I couldn't figure out this out.
And give it how to do yourself. Well, that's what I paid.
So to get some padding, we don't get the text styles. So we know something is happening. It's still not quite as we expect it to be. This is very strange. How about this? Let's go to your Chrome. Well, actually, no. I was going to say make sure you clear your caches, but whatever.
Right.
I got to move this one. That's strange.
I downloaded the Bootstrap.css4 to compare to. It does seem like this has an extra set that's the .columns -3, whereas
Now let's get rid of these rows for exploring one. Let's get rid of XS and MD.
okay.
I'm gonna get them coming.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm gonna grab some water from, I don't have coins or.
Here's where it's applying it. So this is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
version 4. Like there is some stuff for column. Like
Yeah, so it's possible to have a version 6.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
when we changed like the medium to
Yeah, it still didn't do it.
This
but yeah, this line
Yeah,
here,
you can
it's
clearly
different.
see that it's not called.
Doing the same stuff though.
Yeah.
Versus there, so like
I bought a Christmas tree. Well, this one's scary, yeah. And that's
Arsenal.
that's it. My front house lawyer.
well, this is
It's a good opportunity up in the store.
Yeah.
I can't find one I like.
I guess that makes sense, yeah.
Like-
that's weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it like holds up, looks surprisingly small, but
Take
like,
a look at this one.
it's just like.
Maybe I have
there's
my
no
versions
actual
wrong.
storage.
What I meant to be doing is we need for people to use it just the forms. Yeah.
Well, I don't like clutter, so like, that's why I would do something that you just like, put it in, close it up, and you don't see anything. Very excited about this, right now. No, it's one that's very realistic. It's all tree-lit, so I don't have to do anything, just put it together and love it.
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second. All right. All right.
Yeah. We'll use 4. The syntax is available is 4.
Okay.
I make that one.
My apartment's like very, mostly like restoration hardware and stuff, so it's like not really modern per se. But this is just
Oh, it's true. I'm the best worst overthinker.
Yeah.
Northern Lights one, so right, like near Adamsmore. Yeah, where do you live? Bigger? Okay. Okay.
Really? I would imagine it's crazy. Really? Yeah. So you don't learn to mess around with that. Well, cool. Yeah. Is it did you get the vibe or oh, okay. Have you tried that? I got to try a vibe. Yeah, I don't really know. Oh, really? That's great. So I definitely recommend. I don't know if it's available. It's a game called Acting, but it has nothing to do with accounting. It's written by the same people who write Rick and Morty. Yeah, so it's pretty funny. It's good. You tried the farm simulators? Like in Germany, they have farming simulators, truck driving simulators. Apparently, that's how they relax and go back to work. It's crazy. Be afraid to try the recording in VR. Like, they would really terrify.
Okay. All right. So I just want to make a quick update to an announcement I made before. I'd actually got my syntax incorrect when I was talking about Bootstrap. The syntax that allows you to use just the columns with a number instead of including a view type is only available in starting from 4. It wasn't in 3. So I misspoke on that. So when you are using Bootstrap. Try to use Bootstrap 4.0 or higher. Just want to get that out there in case that's causing confusion. No, she had a different issue. Yeah. Cool. So just remember, you want to use Bootstrap 4 and above if you're not including the view size in your styles. All right. And on that note, Bootstrap layout size example. So for one, with a large of 1, 3, medium auto. There we go. Is large, space for all 6. Cool.
Yeah, like right now, the bench I have is black, it's a very minimalist bench, so it's not too heavy. And because I use my dining room space for black metal frame with the frame at the top. So with the bench, I would put that in. It's great, but I don't want to do it right there, because I feel like I don't want to get a bigger bench and it's like a storage bench. And I think black would be too heavy for the space. So I do the light gray. And I do white, but because it's in the corner, I like to do like aromatics on there, like it's yeah.
So that's correct. Yeah, the first one. This one was that one. Oh, okay. So you, this did. This one was that. Oh, that's just like. Yeah, you gotta. Yeah, that's within the rules, man.
Oh, E1, E1. Sorry, you tried to find it.
So they dip around everything.
Yeah, I was thinking the combo very well.
Already should have them. Very first thing you do is have your own, so you just like you did. Yeah, so everything gets you just have and then the end of that dip is you would have, so it would be continuous from the first row, another row. Design.
It's good? Okay, but close. Alright, that works.
Gotta be that color free, man.
think that we do it on that.
Oh, that's yours? I thought that was the image.
Almost there.
Do you have the size by sort of width right now?
So we could say small. Okay, I think that's much easier to understand.